Good afternoon. I'm Hatem Kure, Counsel for the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.
Good afternoon.
In the interest of time, I'm going to focus my questions on you, Ms. Termerscheisen. So you said in your testimony in chief something to the effect that it's important that Canada be seen as welcoming to investment. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
And maintaining that reputation involves being known as the kind of country that has conditions that are favorable to investors?
That's correct.
Okay, so taking a step back from Canada specifically, would you agree that as a general principle, one of the things that investors look for is stability?
Yes.
That includes social stability,
Yes.
economic stability,
Yes.
legal and political stability?
Yes.
And that's true because in many countries, there's political instability that can affect people's legal rights, for example, their property rights, correct?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I would say that yes, there are countries where there is political or other instability, and that makes investments more risky.
Right, and the kind of situation where the political instability in a country might, for example, affect the property interests of an investor would make that undesirable to the investor, right?
Well, I think, for instance, if you have a country where you're making a major, say, mining investment, and you have significant instability, and you maybe can't access that mine. This happens in some countries. That would be an example of the kind of stability you would be looking for.
Right, and would you agree that investors would be hesitant to invest somewhere where their property might be subject to confiscation without judicial authorization, for example?
In terms of investors, yes, I would say so.
And the same would be true for seizure or freezing without judicial authorization?
For investments, yes.
Now, under the emergency economic measures, the bank accounts of protesters and donors could be frozen without prior judicial authorization. Don't you think that that could affect their confidence in Canada as a place to make their investments?
I wouldn't say so. I think that what you had was illegal conduct by individuals and therefore actions taken in response to that illegal conduct. That is not a corollary to a law-abiding investor.
But prior to the declaration of emergency, there wasn't a law that authorized the freezing of those bank accounts, right?
There was illegal conduct at the time.
So the emergency economic measure wasn't necessary to take that action then?
I think others are best placed. That is not a Global Affairs Canada area of expertise, nor is it my area of expertise.
But don't you think that responding to a political protest by extrajudicially preventing people from accessing their own funds would deter people from wanting to place their money in the Canadian financial system?
I think that is, I couldn't really speak to that, but I think investors would be looking at much broader considerations in making decisions to invest in a particular country.
So you don't think that subjecting property rights and the financial system really as a whole to rules made without legislative deliberation or any sort of judicial pre-authorization system would concern a potential investor?
Again, I think the Emergencies Act is a very special consideration that, to my knowledge, is not applied to investors.
Now, one of the things you stated is that the Emergencies Act sent a message to investors that Canada was doing something about the protests. But that same message could have been sent by other federal government action, couldn't it?
So I think that on the Emergencies Act, I can't really speak to what other measures you're referring to. I think the reality is that there were a lot of concerns, particularly on the part of some of the U.S. entities that we spoke to, that in fact the economic blockades at border crossings were continuing, and there was a tremendous amount of concern on the part of U.S. Officials, businesses, unions, that there weren't effective measures being taken to end those blockades.
But successful police enforcement would have assuaged those concerns, wouldn't it?
I would simply say that it's kind of a counterfactual point. The reality is that that hadn't been possible. So certainly in our conversations with U.S. interlocutors, there was a sense of relief once those blockades were ended.
Well, we've heard from police witnesses that the protests would have been cleared even had the Emergencies Act not been invoked. And you have no reason to believe, for the purposes of global affairs responsibilities, that the Emergency Act would have been necessary for other reasons then, do you?
I can only say that, not being an expert on the Emergencies Act itself, that the clearance of the blockades was greeted with relief.
Right, but what I'm asking is that, given that we've heard from police, who are the experts in policing matters, that they've said that they could respond to the protests without the Emergencies Act, for the purposes of matters directly under the concern of Global Affairs Canada, the Emergency Act wasn't necessary for something outside of policing the protests, correct?
I've already answered your question.
Okay, no further questions, thank you.